All the business down there is owned, controlled, and dominated by the Chinese. You cross Canal and go over into Little Italy, where the Italians are the majority population. Over 90% of the business life is controlled by the Italians. You come down to Yorksville, a German town, where the Germans are the majority population, and the business life is under the ownership, control, and domination of the Germans. The Puerto Ricans own the major part of their commerce and business life, and naturally, the chosen ones, Jews, they own everything in their community. They definitely are the pure example of what a person ought to do for themselves. They don't let nobody take nothing out. They don't even eat the food unless it's kosher. And they tell you it's kosher because they have to make it kosher. And they have to put their hands on it. Well, you and I, dealing with our economic status, we have just proved that we have the money, and we have individuals with large segments of money. But being that we do not behave like other people, we do not keep that money amongst ourselves and let it circulate like all other people do, and we just give it back 8 hours after we get it to the source from which it came. Being that you're handling all this money and you're in this imperialist capital of the world, as Professor Amos Wilson was bringing out in the video presentation about, this is the capital of the master thieves of the world, the imperialists. This is their home. Although they make up 6–7% of the population, they have a criminal syndicate on a worldwide basis that allow them to own, control, and dominate over 80% of the world's wealth. This is their capital. This is the big house. This is where it's managed and controlled and where it is directed from. We just happen to be the porters and maids in the big house, and so all the goodies is here, and we see the boss shifting his good from one place to the other, and every now and then we get a chance to steal some of it and get us a piece of the goodies too, that we think we are blessed because we're around master thieves who have over 80% of the world's wealth. Now the other part of it, dependent and passive. When someone have to feed you and you don't feed yourself, you're dependent on them for food. Someone clothe you and you don't clothe yourself, you're dependent on them for clothing. Someone house you or build your health, education, welfare, other institutions, you are dependent on them for your survival. And it is an old proverb in all cultures, he who feeds you will boss you. And being that we find ourselves dependent on food, clothing, shelter, and protection, yet with all these black colleges and all of these wonderful institutions of learning in New York City, all these great scholars, there's no program coming out of the mouths or the minds of any significant effect that's leading African people to solve the mysteries of their economic problem, to say, yeah, we have to eat, let us pool our monies and our thoughts and our efforts together and get us an agriculture system so that we can feed ourselves. And since you don't do that, it comes back to crazy. You must be out of your mind to let the white man put his hand on all the food before you put it in your stomach. I mean, you must be highly religious because you damn sure ain't no scientist. You believe it's some mojo protecting you from all harms. And that's where you at, why you're at the bottom of everything too. That you believe that you can trust your stomach to a known homicidal maniac. People who has a record of poisoning races out. But you say, well, let the white man keep the food a little longer, and let us pray to this God and that God, and let us don't do nothing concretely about removing ourselves of this dependency and of this potential horror. And it is happening because the nutritional value that they send to the black communities is of the lowest in the world. They take care better of the pigs and the cows than they do the black communities. They send better food to them than they do us up here. But can we complain, being human beings and supposed to possess all of the potential intelligence and capabilities of other people, that we would sit idly by and let another man feed us? Naturally, when he feeds us, he tells us, well, if you want this food, there's some buck dancing and angel mama and I want you to do to get it. Some flunky roles I want you to play. I want you to belittle yourself in front of your wife and your children and your other kid and kin, or I'm not going to feed you. And being that it has been a weapon of the enemy to cripple our minds at birth, the system is designed to wipe the young black kid out before he can almost talk. Number one, he's born in an abnormal environment. Two, the people who are going to nurture him, who he's going to bond with and shape him, they are victims of white psychology and white propaganda. For example, a big black Zulu woman giving baby for a big black Zulu man, and when the baby come out, she gonna sing him an Irish lullaby. She gonna take him to some bootleg Negro preacher who gonna Christian him, put the stigma of the cross on him, and tell him that as long as you will suffer under this cross, you have it made. But if you dare try to be free of this cross, you're doomed forever. If it ain't the cross, it's another symbol. Because why? The African was blessed with the strongest physique among all human beings to make him adaptable to live everywhere, and with a most creative mind among all human beings, allow him to invent and create his way out of any condition that he finds himself in. Those of us who are acquainted with history, and we didn't come to talk about history as per se, but we who know ourselves know that we were here for millions of years before any other race of people evolved, that we mastered the art of survival. We mastered agricultural and textile building and shelter building. We created the arts and the sciences long, many myriads of years before there was another race of people. So we know who we are and what we are capable of doing. But we do also know that there was an Arab and a European slave trade. And that Arab and European slave trade and colonialism over the African people in the African continent separated the African from reality. from sanity and put upon him a slave and a colonialist mentality that convinced him that the world belongs to the white man, that intelligence germinated from white people, that beauty was beholden in the white woman, and white woman only. Right and wrong could only come out of the minds of white people. Now that was installed through terror, through education, through mixed breeding, and a conglomerate of horrible and evil schemes that were perpetuated on us by our white brethren. Now the effects of that is still in existence, and that is where the problem comes. The slave thoughts is still in the minds of the African community, transmitted from the slave mama to the slave baby, and the slave preacher and the slave school teacher, living in a slave environment where they are dependent and passive, making it almost impossible for any clarity to be in their thinking. It is designed to produce frustration and confusion so that you cannot get a good thought out of your head. And it says, so you think, so you act. If you act wrong, if you think wrong, you're going to act wrong. If you think you're a Negro, then you're not going to be an African. If you think you're a Caribbean or West Indian, you're not going to be an African. If you think you are British or Dutch or German or some other alien subject, you're not going to be an African. You're going to be some kind of mental hybrid. Your body and your physiognomy is African, but your mentality and your mental concept is non-African, a freak of nature by any standard of measurement. And so consequently, by being led into that type of state by the people who are benefiting by having us in this state, because what happened? Without putting the chains on you, he could put you in a community in Harlem and keep you so passive that they can walk up here and take out 95% of your money and have you laughing and ready to hurt anybody if you tell you that, hey, that's wrong. You're supposed to control the commerce business life of your community like all those other racial and ethnic groups who make up the majority of their population control theirs. But every day in Harlem, non-African people come out here and take up 95% of the money every day. Nobody throw a brick. Nobody even sign a protest. Happy to be robbed by the white massa. The continent of Africa, the richest piece of real estate in the world, your native, natural, normal, moral, legal home. Everybody says that is yours except you and the white man. The white man tell you that because he is stealing the goodies that make him have a high standard of living and got you confused and frustrated that here you are the legal heirs of all that wealth and you are the poorest people in the world. Got you chasing all kind of phantoms. If you have an economic problem, it must be approached with an economic antidote. If you have a psychological problem, it must be approached with a psychological antidote. Your economic problem is meeting your material needs. What would happen if you were intelligent enough to make that your priority? Poverty would leave you immediately. Unemployment would leave you immediately. The disrespect that is shown to you throughout the world would leave you immediately. You would have so many jobs and positions that you won't be able to fill them. You'd have to be hiring other races of people to flunk it for you to help you grow the food to feed yourself, to make the clothing to clothe yourself, to build the houses. And naturally, since we have Europeans and other criminals roaming this earth, you need some protection. You got to be able to keep the wolves off of you. You got to get some weapons of destruction, that if someone come to rob you, they don't ever leave. They die. And set the proper example that I am not a Negro no more. You just can't come in here and take me off and take my wealth and take my community. I have joined the human race. And so consequently, when the world look upon us, whether we in Brooklyn, Bronx, or Staten Island, or whether we in Georgia, Texas, the Caribbean, or in Africa, somebody else is running the commerce business life. Somebody else is dominating the body politics of all communities where we are majority population. Now that is crazy. Now anybody that can live in peace with that, you must be dead. You know, I used to think zombies were make-believe. When I say, people say, I say ain't no such thing as zombie. They just do that to ridicule us as a people. Then I found out it was true. That I didn't know nothing but zombies. And it remind me, I went to Dr. Jeffrey's class, and Dr. Jeffrey was breaking down the problems confronting the African people. And as he got through telling about how the psychological damage had been done to the African and the methods of the enemy in keeping it that way, one young man jumped up and said, if I believe what you said, I would believe that all of us is out of our mind. Dr. Jeffrey said, I've been trying to tell you that ever since I opened my mouth this day. You are out of your mind, and so is the rest of us. When we can't see that we are human beings and we should be in charge of ourselves. When we would trust the animal that's in charge of our food to feed us, we got to be crazy. You got to be crazy. You ask, where's that Mohawken and the rest of them native people that hung around here, went to the Thanksgiving dinner and did never leave? You know, where's them? Where's it? Now, this is not, the whole place is the place, United States of America, which makes it impossible for us to solve our problems, because the European in his white psychology and white propaganda has convinced the African people that this is their home. This is a criminally possessed place. A bunch of white criminals came from Europe and disrespected the territorial integrity of the native people here and took these people's land and named this land after one of their white criminal kinspeople. There was no such thing 400 or 500 years ago as no land called United States of America or America. America is a cracker. And it's named after him after they stole the people's land. Now, being a know-for-good and lazy bum that the white race is, he went to Africa and kidnapped and shanghaied and brought us here so we would build the land. And got a lot of nerve to tell the people, don't fool with them black Americans, they lazy. Lazy? What you mean lazy? All the damn work we done around here, and you're talking about we don't want to work. Why should we work anymore? We haven't got paid for the work we done. The hell we want to work some more for? You know? Let him empty his own slop buckets and do his own buck dancing and doing it. He's the one lazy. Oh, I like to hire him. I like for him to give me 400 years of back labor, and let's call it even. We can start it off now. You know, I might make it retroactive for a couple of weeks for him. You know, and we'll see who's lazy. He don't want to work for me. He ain't lazy, but I don't want to work for him. I'm lazy. And I didn't gave him 400 years and didn't get paid for it as it is. not only as I would be lazy, I'd be crazy, really be crazy to keep on being a servitude and a flunky of this diabolical criminal. And that's what's wrong with us. We are trying to claim some legitimacy in a criminal setup that's not ours. It wasn't stole for us. It wasn't originally ours. It's not ours now. Oh, we do have some powerful flunky roles in it, but this is not our land. And the sad part about it is, you would attach yourself to this and turn your back on what is yours when yours is 10,000 times more beneficial than this. And I know that hurt you. I'm trying to get you to leave the master's house and go back to your wealth and your self-respect and your dignity. The African continent is where the African is going to solve his problems. The future of the African in a dignified, respectable way will germinate from the African continent. About you staying here, I don't believe he want to kill you. Why should he want to kill you? You the sweetest thing ever happened to the white race. So you love the white race better than the white race love itself. There's a lot of things that the white race won't do to preserve itself that Bowles will jump up and say, hey, boss, I'll do it for you and show you how to keep white people over us forever. You want me to kill my mama and a couple of my relatives to prove it to you? They're dead. And that's not no joke. That's a reality. The psychological conquest of the African, it's a temporary thing if we make it temporary. It's only permanent because we volunteer to let the European continue to control our minds, to let anybody control our minds. As I started off, we are the original people. We made it millions of years before we met anybody, which is proof evidence we know how to make it. All of the empires, all of the languages and the arts and sciences, the religions, they are creations out of our mentality. We have nothing to be ashamed of, not even the slave era, to prove that we could go through that. As a matter of fact, everybody all over the world look upon us marvels. They say those black people in America they're some wonderful people. They must be magicians, because if they can stay side by side with that white homicidal maniac and live, they got to know something. And then again, not only we stand side by side, particularly in these ghettos, it ain't the best living in the world, but Whitey got a bill on his hand, you know. You got to keep the checks coming, keep the food stamps coming, keep the Medicaid coming, the methadone and the methodex, you know. He got that bill on his hand, and if it ain't there, going to be big trouble the next day. You know, you will see a revolution. But why? What is that? When he got the gold and the diamonds and the coffee and the cocoa and the uranium and the inexhaustible wealth that should be yours, you should be the owners, the controllers and managers of it. You should be the one that is hiring him, having him flunky to get a little of your natural wealth. But if you're crazy, you won't know what's yours, and that's what America is designed to drive the African crazy, to make sure that he do not understand that the world of Africa and the black communities is for him to own, control, to dominate. We came here tonight, as I said, analyzing this economic and psychological status of the Africans, and I'm quite sure our main speaker is going to give you another excellent dose of information that will enlighten you and inspire you to understand the world around you. However, we do have a couple other speakers. We were scheduled to hear a message from our sisters. We have one of them here, and she's supposed to get with a couple others and bring us a special message. And our other speaker, he just came in, We want him to get his breath and come and give us a few moments. And the sisters come up and give us a few moments so that we can turn the chair over to our main speaker, who, by the way, we of the African Nationalist Construction Movement, as you see, we come here and document what we're doing. We do that with a scientific purpose. We are producing byproducts from these programs that those who are not here will not miss the program and not miss the message. And at the same time, Professor Amos Wilson and the rest of us, we maintain places of business. We maintain programs. We have machinery and tools, and those things cost money. And we are getting together to help each other promote our messages on a commercial and educational basis, where we will be helping solving the mystery of our economic problems by being able to pay our rent and to meet our utilities bill and still have time to produce books and to carry out progressive programs throughout the community for the benefit of our African people. So at this time, I'm going to call upon Brother Dr. Bashiri Uzima, who is the treasurer of the African Nationalist Construction Movement and chairman of the Universal African Relief. At this particular time, the Universal African Relief has a program assisting in alleviating some of the poverty and addressing some of the poverty in the Republic of Namibia, Southwest Africa. The African Nationalist Construction Movement has a base for all African people to use to come and help Namibia in its economic development and be there so you can help South Africa and the rest of it. And Brother Bashiri has been active in this since its beginning. He has taken on the chairmanship of the Universal African Relief, and he will give you a good breakdown on what he's about. And you know, you're in trouble. It ain't right for you as a black man to be living all under that whiteism. It ain't normal. Not if you want to be dignified and self-respecting. You want to be where you can realize your highest and fullest ambition. You can do that in Namibia. You can do anything in the world you want to do in Namibia if you're big and bad and aggressive enough to do it. Or you can hang around here like you've been hanging around here. I mean hanging at that too, literally. And so consequently, we are proud to have the young ladies and young men coming together and understanding that this is a collective struggle. We have to cross all religions and all politics and all nationalities and come together as a unified African race with the purpose of the welfare of all of us. We need this collective unity. Those are good thoughts. Those are the proper thoughts. That's where the psychology begins, getting good thoughts in your head. Then they'll come out in your feet and your bodies and your arms and the rest of your actions. But we got to get good thoughts in your head. And there's no dignified existence for you to live under white culture, white political, white economic, and social domination. We have to rid ourselves of that. And it gives me great pleasure this time to introduce one of our young sisters who not only has good promising, but she is a very positive contributor in our organization today, Ms. Stacy Spencer.
Got two of them. Okay, thank you very much, Brother Harris. Hotep, it's good to see this many people out tonight. Usually there's a presentation given by the Ladies Auxiliary explaining the ANCM's goals and the purpose of the Ladies Auxiliary in respect to that. But tonight, since I'm by myself, I figured I would do more than that. I want to take some time to share some thoughts with you and perhaps leave us all with something to think about. Earlier this week, as I was walking from my job, or as some of us will call it, my slave, to the agency that employs me to pick up my already spent check, I came upon a scene that left me disturbed, but in thought. I saw a small crowd gathering on the sidewalk ahead of me, and of course, as I approached, I saw some young sisters and brothers in the midst of some type of conflict. As I drew closer to the Wendy's that they were standing in front of, I nearly had to knock some nosy Caucasian lady out of my way to get past the scene. When I was in the path of it all, I could see a small table with gold jewelry laid out on it under the awning outside of the Wendy's, safe from the wet snow, sleet, and rain that was coming down that day. An older black man was jumping around in front of the table yelling, "I said I ain't moving. What you gonna do, huh? He was obviously very upset, and the fact that the situation was being perpetuated by black youngsters, I'm sure, made it all the more inflammatory. As I passed by the yelling and screaming match on the sidewalk, downtown, midday, in the middle of white American everyday life, I thought, what an ugly scene. Then one young man, or a young boy, stepped up and took things to another level. I turned around in time to see him step to his elder in disrespect, eyes bulging, lips tight, and head tilted sideways in that too familiar, too popular, gangster generation stance that says, "Come on, what you gonna do?" Well, one of the girls yelled, "No, Joe, stop," as it turned into a pushing match, and a few blows were exchanged, I think, before they got broken up. As I crossed the street, shaking my head in disgust, I was thinking, if I was a bolder person and I had a little bit more time, I would go back across the street to the Wendy's and confront that little Negro myself. I'm certain that that would have encouraged an impromptu reciting of every itch and hoe lyric that ever recorded in a song or rap directed towards myself. So I kept walking and thinking about what I would have said if I had the chance, and I do now. First of all, why would he fight a black man over a white man's job? He had on a cheesy little hamburger flipping uniform that they make you wear. Obviously, he was not the owner of the franchise, and he doggone sure was not Wendy. So why would a minimum wage, $4.65 an hour, overworked schoolboy be beating up on his elder with such anger and conviction and self-hatred in his eyes on a crowded city street in front of all these white people? Because massa sent his dumb butt out there? Because the man told him to? As a popular record on the radio says, funk that. Here's a brother, old enough to be his own father, perhaps it was, trying to make an independent living for himself in the snow, in the rain, the sleet, and below freezing temperature, and he's fighting him over setting up on a piece of property that only a native of America could rightfully claim. Would he prefer having to step over him, sleeping on a grate in a cardboard box, or have him standing pitiful, begging for money on the train with an old coffee cup, trying to sing an old Marvin Gaye song in a drunken stupor, or maybe on a dark street one night trying to rob his mother? I wouldn't, would you? My point is this. Most of our children, our youth, most of our people have no respect, no love, no sense of umoja, no self-determination, no values, and no common sense when it comes to us. We would rather defend another person's property than to get some of our own. We would rather build up another person's business rather than to start our own. We would rather marry another man or woman than to deal with loving, respecting, and understanding our own natural partner in life. And we would even go so far as to fight another man's war over stolen land than to fight our own war to defend our mother's land and our people. We have a sickness amongst us as a whole. Our priorities are all screwed up, and it is because we do not have our own way of thinking and rationalizing anymore. We don't have our own land, our own institutions are financed by someone else's money and controlled by someone else's interests. We don't have control of our communities or even our households and our children. We let television and music do that. I say it's nation time. It is about us, about respecting black women, black men, black children, black families, black schools, black businesses, black leaders, black pride, black beauty, black nationalism. Our ancestors did not die in vain. It is time for us to come together beyond all boundaries of complexion, hair type, religion, class, job description, type of car we drive, where we live, and who we're down with. It is time for a truce, not only between the nations of Islam, but between every black organization and group, especially in New York City under the evil power of Rudy Giuliani and his gangster police mob. On Friday, January 28th, there will be a forum here sponsored by the ladies of the ANCM dealing with unity amongst us, entitled United We Stand, Divided We Fall. Please come and support us that night. Thank you for coming out tonight. One cause, one goal, one destiny.
Thank you, Sister Stacy. We're going to move on before I introduce you to the main speaker of the night. I was reading a book here, Carlos Cook's and Black Nationalism, and here's a statement he made. Said, the problem as it projects itself on people of African descent in the Americas is an economic and psychological one, and should be treated as such. History and civilization have revealed the crux of mankind's problems and troubles, and can be summed up by the respective group's ability or inability to solve the mystery of their economic problems. History has shown that once a people focus their attention on their economic plight and organize it, all else normally takes care of itself. With the establishment of a sovereign economy by the group brings self-reliance, racial clannishness, mass cooperation, and a common cause psychosis, which invariably leads to the erection of racial standards and the formulation of a distinct and exclusive sense of values. This evolves into an original racial cultural pattern and reaches its climax in a deafening mass clamor for nationhood. And closing on that point, it is in nationhood, which is the highest, most intelligent, the safest form of organization that man has evolved in today. A nation is the one that looks out for all of its citizens. No wonderful example is in Libya today. Now, they claim that 2 Libyans blew up a plane in Scotland. And America and England said that they have evidence that those 2 citizens did that. And they said, give them to me, or I'm going to boycott you, I'll bomb you. Now, with nationhood, you are compelled to spend the last dime in the treasure and the last bullet in your arsenal to protect all your citizens. And Gaddafi is showing you exactly what you're supposed to do in protecting those 2 fellows who he could easily give up and go on and make him some more money, but the dignity of nationhood require him to stand behind his citizens with the full strength of the nation. And so with that in point, it gives me great pride to bring the one man that I have found that addresses the program more in line with what we do than anybody else in this city. And it's always been that way, that Brother Professor Amos Wilson and myself, one of our things in criticizing the others is they don't talk economics. They want to talk everything else but that. So it's a great pleasure to be with him tonight, Professor Amos Wilson.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Thank you kindly. Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to share this time with you and to be invited to be with you. And I'd like to thank you for coming out in spite of all the dire predictions of the weather and so forth. And just in sort of keeping the faith, I'd like to also thank those of you who have supported African World Info Systems in buying our publications. Our book, Falsification, is doing quite well along with the other books. And we appreciate that very much. We want to let you know, of course, that the sales from our books are not personally used by myself. And when I say us, I'm talking about Brother Sababu Plata, who's my main partner there, myself, of course, and Sister Dorothy Lewis, and others who support us at African World Info Systems. The chief purpose is to distribute information and to provide the necessary information and analysis to advance our interest as a people. We're going to talk a little bit about economics this evening. Of course, we don't have as much time as we would need. This would take quite a bit of time. Hopefully, though, I've been promising to do a series on Black Power. I have to announce again that we do expect to get our book out, A Blueprint for Black Power, in March. It started out as a project for writing 10 lectures. And unfortunately, or fortunately, the one, you'll be the judge of that, it has ballooned up to about 600 pages. So this is one of the reasons why we've been a bit delayed. So I think when we get through with the final editing, it'll be somewhere between 400 and 500 pages. And even with that, we are skimming the surface of the things that we need to know. I've stated in other contexts, we bragged a great deal about how the Egyptian priests were educated for 40 years, and yet we think that we can accomplish the education we need for nationhood and power, meeting 2 hours every weekend. In a nation that is on top today, that has respect today, is a nation that takes great time in educating its leaders and in educating its important citizens. That 40-year education was not just unique to Egypt, it happens today. If you go through a full, say, PhD program, it's easy for you to spend 40 years getting educated. Even if you don't, if you get a master's, a BA, or you don't even get that, it still may take you 40 years to be truly educated and to get some sense of how the world operates and to learn the methods and the means for dealing with the world. I've indicated in other contexts as well that every culture has its unique time dimension. And one of the problems that we have today is the fact that we have not yet applied African time to our own processes as a people. I've indicated that our children are being destroyed in these schools in terms of the time system alone, let alone all the other things that are going on there. But because the time system that is being used there has been inherited from another people. We say that they go into the schools with different motivations from the standard population. We say that they may come from various home backgrounds and economic backgrounds with various psychological orientations toward the world and so forth and so on, with a different mission to achieve in life and this and that. And then in the name of equal education, we want them to get over all of this to learn exactly what the others learned within the same period of time given to the others. And when they do not learn what we think they should, or we've been told that they should learn, we're ready then to talk about them in terms of learning deficiencies and in need of special education and all of the other kinds of things we hear out here every day. Instead of reconstructing the time system in terms of who they are and what they have to accomplish as a people. To the topic at hand, I would agree with Dr. Uzima that in a sense, in terms of the topic of this evening session, we are all for those titles. You've heard me say, of course, that in order for us to be in the condition we are in as people, we have to be out of our minds. It is a political and economic necessity. It is mandatory. And I'm not being rhetorical when I make that statement. We are a rich people, and yet we perceive ourselves as poverty-stricken. But our richness is not as much in our lands as in another place. The ultimate wealth of a people is in their head, in their heads, not even in their soils. What do we mean by that? We mean by that the kind of situation we see today, where the people who have the natural wealth in their lands are starving and do not own those lands. And yet people who did not have the lands, did not own the lands, are in control of those lands and in control of the wealth. I've often said somewhat facetiously that perhaps Africans would have been better off economically, politically, and otherwise had we not had the wealth in the African soil. Then we would have been forced to use our minds. The Japanese have no wealth in their soils. They have no natural minerals or anything else. In an objective sense, we should call the Japanese a very dependent nation. But their dependency has not made them poor. They make the people who supply them, make them wealthy. Because of what? Because of the consciousness that they project in the world. When you have the right mind, you can con people out of their wealth. You don't have to have any land if you're smart enough to talk other people out of theirs or take other people's lands. In other words, then, the ultimate determiner of wealth and power in the world is the mind of the human being. And that is why, then, we are poverty-stricken, not because we have not been blessed with wealth, but because we have been robbed of our greatest wealth, which is our mentality and our consciousness as a people. We would have to be out of our minds to be in the condition that we are in today, and to be dealing with almost a total reversal of reality that we deal with today, where those who own least, who were given least by nature, are in control of the most, and those who were given most have the least. This can only occur when the mind of those who have least has been twisted and turned backwards, and their consciousness falsified. We are not a dependent people, even though we think we are. We've been made to believe we are. And yet, when we talk about our stolen wealth, we're talking about other people who depend on it. When we talk about our enslavement, we're talking about people who depend on our labor. When we talk about the $300 billion or more that we earn, we talk about people who have enriched themselves in terms of how we spend that money. People whose first beeline is to the poor African community in America to enrich themselves. We are still America's greatest wealth-producing population right now. The issue is not so much what we earn, for if we earn $300 billion, then we must produce trillions, because in a capitalist system, you only get a fraction in terms of earning of what you produce. So we're getting paid $300 billion. We must be producing well over $1 trillion, which would mean, ladies and gentlemen, that African people in America are one of the world's largest economies. We marvel because a Mike Tyson earns $20 million for a fight without recognizing that if a Mike Tyson is earning that, the fight itself is generating $200 million. And yet we don't ask ourselves, where is the other $180 million? We marvel about some athlete earning 10 or 15 million a year. Well, if that's the case, then that athlete must be worth to his owners $100 million, $150 million a year. We don't ask ourselves what happens to those other hundreds of millions of dollars. We marvel about a Michael Jackson or someone else who's earned 60 or 70 or $100 million. And yet we do not recognize that the American music industry is probably the second largest export industry that this country has. We think of music as purely entertainment, but music is a commodity. Black music sells about 60% of the music sold in the world. It outsells other people's native music. It is worth billions of dollars. And yet we're willing to sing for pennies a record. And we're willing to give away our major cultural product to other people. We trade far more money with this nation than Canada. Don't be deceived because Canada is a large territory, that it therefore is worth more money to the United States than our black people. We have worth far more money to this nation than is Mexico, even with the NAFTA agreement. Do not again be deceived because it represents a large land mass. We are to a great extent America's wealth. However, that is rapidly coming to an end. And if we do not transform ourselves within the next 5 to 10 years, we will go into almost irreversible decline and perhaps genocidal demise. We do not have much time, ladies and gentlemen. The nature of the world is changing so rapidly and dynamically. We can no longer debate year in and year out about which way we are going. We must now not only think locally, but we have to think globally. Because the very nature of our local circumstances are being transformed by international circumstances. When you look out of this building and you walk out of these streets and you see Asians, you see Koreans, Arabs, others, this is the result of global changes in the world. People who are running away from the dislocations in their own economies coming here to America. We are looking at a situation here where the world is being transformed and a new world government is coming into being, where sovereign nations will no longer exist. If you have a bit of time, you should investigate the NAFTA agreements and the so-called GATT agreements. Not only does the so-called NAFTA Accord threaten to further unemploy African-American people, but the NAFTA Accords are a major step to where this nation, along with other nations, will cease to operate as sovereign nations within themselves, where the world essentially will be run by corporations, by a small group of white males with an intermix of Asian males, and perhaps a third level of Latino males, but principally European and Asian males who are already setting the world up. Take a little time and investigate the so-called side agreements that were passed over quickly when the discussion about NAFTA took place. What are those side agreements? Why were they not discussed? Why was it required that NAFTA be passed as a whole piece rather than to be debated and passed upon piece by piece? In other words, the U.S. Congress itself of the sovereign United States was told that you must take the whole agreement or none of it. You have no right to take it apart and say, I don't like this or I don't like that, therefore I will not agree with this or I will not agree with that. No, they were told you've got to take the whole thing or nothing at all, and you've got to do it for a particular period of time, which meant, ladies and gentlemen, that the so-called citizens of the United States, through their elected representatives, lost all rights economic and political circumstances. It meant then that the United States courts and other United States tribunals and bodies could not pass upon legislation that would transform the economic atmosphere and transform the whole geography of the nation. Those people whose jobs would be destroyed, those people whose jobs would be exported, would have nothing to say to their representatives about an agreement that was doing this to them. Some of the side agreements indicate that the rules about trade and differences concerning trade would not be arbitrated in the courts of the United States, would not be arbitrated in the Supreme Court, or would not be arbitrated in the legislatures of the United States, but be arbitrated by an international tribunal in secret session. And the ruling of these tribunals would supersede the ruling of the nations themselves. So consequently then, the so-called governmental agencies that you think you're voting for and that you think are representing your interests will not be able to rule in your favor in terms of the ruling and the arbitration of these tribunals. So what do we have going on here? A structuring of the world by corporate elites. Because in whose interest is the GATT agreement operating? Who will be doing the trading? You, me, or the corporation? So whose agreement and who is agreeing? We are dealing with Mexico, which is run by about 17 families. An oligarchy, not a democracy. An oligarchy that was embarrassed here last week by that area that is soon going to be taken over by a small group of people. That area whose land will be ripped out from under the natives so that they may enter into a trade with the elites in America. If you had a chance, you could check out the GATT agreement. Another interesting thing there too. And really check out the struggle that went on between France and the United States that people thought were trivial. Where the United States was literally telling France, look, our movies sell well in France. Our movies sell better than the French movies do. Why not give up your industry? Forget about French culture. Buy American culture. We deliver it to you for a cheaper price. Why not give your consumers what they want? And the French said no. But they're telling the French, you have no right to subsidize your cultural industry or to subsidize your actors and actresses and so forth. The only right you have to do is to swing your doors open and let your nation be flooded by American products. But even more ominous was the struggle between the French and the Americans over farming. The French who are subsidizing their farmers, maintaining their farmers. The United States tells them you have no right to subsidize your farmers. You must create an open and free market. And if the farm products of the United States are much cheaper than the farm products produced by French farmers, then too bad. If it means ultimately that France would have no farmers, so what? It's better for the world. You should buy U.S. food. What kind of nation, even if it has to pay more for its food, would decide to give up a very basic industry like farming and place its very livelihood and place its provisioning in terms of food in the hands of the international market? Only a Negro nation would do that. And the French told them, we're not going to do it. The same struggle went on with the Japanese. The United States saying what? throw your farmers out of business. We have super rights. And the Chevys say that we value our farmers and we value their being employed. What difference does it make? We're talking about a free trade system here. And if people are thrown out of business, so be it. And so these are the things that are occurring behind so-called GATT agreements, behind NAFTA agreements, and other agreements. And it is time, African ladies and gentlemen, that you begin to study these issues, simply because they are talks between white men and so forth and Asian men, and simply because the terms may not be readily familiar does not mean that they have nothing to do with you. They have everything to do with you. You must recognize that with these so-called agreements, Africa and African people are being isolated out of the world market. For instance, in this GATT agreement, the people who run the textile industry in South Carolina, in North Carolina, the industries where some of your relatives, I'm sure, may be employed, an industry that employs a large number of African Americans. These people who ran those industries had to struggle with the American negotiators to protect those textile mills for another 10 years. But after 10 years, the agreement is that the textiles from China and other parts of the world will be permitted a free-flowing market in America, and therefore the American textile industry will probably disappear to be around no longer. And that means the African Americans and other people who are employed in those industries will be unemployed. In fact, many of the industries that will be wiped out by so-called free trade are the very industries where the bulk of African Americans are employed today and at this moment. So these are not abstract talks between white men and Asian men and other men. These are talks that have direct effects on our lives as a people. And we should know what they are. It is a shame anyway that we let people who are less than 5% of the globe determine the economic destiny of the globe. That a bunch of men who call themselves men, black men who call themselves men, but who are at heart total cowards, will let another bunch of white boys determine their economic destiny. Have meetings among themselves and determine how we shall live. What group of real men have their highest aspirations as that involving being employed by the men of another ethnic group? It is an amazing situation that black men have seen themselves as the permanent second bananas of white men who are getting angry. You hear a book out here now talking about the anger of the successful Negroes. You know, you should be angry. You should be angry with yourself. You are angry because the white boys are not letting you in. What a shame. Why aren't you creating your own industry? But let's look again at the NAFTA. Where were the Afro-Caribbean nations in that agreement? Where were the African nations during that agreement? Let's look at the GATT agreement. Where does Africa fit in those agreements? What you have going on here, ladies and gentlemen, is almost a total isolation of African people across the whole diaspora. You have a NAFTA agreement, which is essentially a club between Mexico, the United States, and Canada. And the members of this club are giving each other special privileges. Privileges that will be denied other people who are not members of the club. They will get special discounts, access to special markets, special protections, special financing, and other kinds of things because they are members of the NAFTA club. And yet we see no African nations and know people who are part of that. You talk about trading with Africa. You talk about trading with the Caribbean nations. What is going to happen when you decide to trade with the Caribbean nations and trade with the African nations and find out that you cannot enter into the kind of trade you want to because the methods you have chosen to trade run against the NAFTA agreement? That the United States has agreed with the Mexicans or agreed with the Canadians that certain products outside of their club cannot be imported into the country, or that products that are imported into the country must be taxed in some special sort of way, and yet you're a part of the so-called nation. You talk about trade, you talk about exporting materials to Africa. Well, what if the materials or the services you plan to export to Africa run up again against NAFTA agreements? This is what we're talking about here, ladies and gentlemen. Serious issues. It is time for African American people to get over our ignorance. You got to read more than books written by black folk, because the books are not covering enough territory. You cannot let yourself be deceived by people who tell you simply because books are written by white folk, you should not read them. White folk don't write every book to deceive black folk. They don't write every book with you in mind. Why do black people have problems reading? Because they're not taught well in school? Not really. The problems black people have with reading has nothing to do with academia. What are we saying here? The problem that we have with reading as a people is a political problem that expresses itself in school as an academic problem. What do I mean by that? I mean by that there is so much information in America, real information, factual information, information everywhere you look, free-flowing information. So in order for us to be ignorant, we have to will ourselves to be ignorant. In a sense, we must be dumb in America in order not to take advantage of the information available to us. In other words, there is so much information available that if we truly could read as a people, and I'm not talking about technical reading, there are those who have great vocabularies who still can't read. We truly must not be interested in reading in order for this information to flow around us the way it does. In other words, we have to fall asleep over our books. We have to get headaches when we read. We have to lack interest in reading. We have to, if we are men, see reading as a feminine activity, as something that we are not supposed to do, as something that's exclusively the right of white boys. In other words, these kinds of attitudes must be psychologically and politically induced in the black mind so that whites can enjoy freedom of speech and lay out every means, line by line and chapter by chapter, of how they rule African people and maintain us in subordination. This is what it's about, and it's here, and it's available for us. And yet we are not availing ourselves to the information. We are entering into an age now where the wars are not the wars so much which involve military might, but what we call econo-wars. Wars of economy, where nations will be defeated and destroyed as effectively by their economic positions and struggles as they used to be defeated in terms of military struggles. Ronald Reagan and the white conservatives made up their minds years ago that they would destroy Russia, not in terms of dropping bombs on Russia, but that they would spin Russia into the ground. And what they would do would keep escalating the cost of weapons and keep escalating military budgets. And as the Russians sought to keep up with them in military spending, ultimately Russia would collapse economically. And that is exactly what happened, and the Russian Empire fell apart. And today Clinton is in Russia getting ready to feed on that nation like vultures. And the Eastern Europeans who were a part of the so-called Warsaw Pact now want to join NATO. Why? Because of the wars of economics. And these nations are now teaming up to make war against African nations and African people. We can talk then about the regional agreement between Asian nations, and African nations are not a part of those agreements. We can talk about the regional agreements in Latin America. They're now setting up Chile, and they're now setting up Argentina to be the next members of the NAFTA Accords. In other words, ultimately, the United States will wrap in the whole of Central and South America into the NAFTA club, along with Canada. Where are the Caribbean Africans in this situation? In other words, then, we see Europe creating a community of nations. And we see ultimately Europe uniting with Eastern Europe and the other parts of Europe. We will ultimately see Islamic nations creating economic blocs. And where then are the African blocs, and where is the Pan-African economic system? We got Negroes over here singing "We Shall Overcome" and talking about they're a part of some multicultural society and talking about diversity in the workplace. Getting over ethnicity when the whole world is combining in terms of ethnicity. But this is the game. This is the game we've fallen for century after century. People talking one thing and doing another. And now we see that the African Americans are being isolated in this very nation. We are now more segregated in this nation than we were in the 1920s. You read here recently that the level of segregation of black children, and I'm not saying this is a bad thing, is now at its, in schools, is now back at its 1960s levels. We have reached the point where the black male is essentially economically obsolete and useless. And this is at the bottom of this war that's getting ready to develop on the black male. I warned you in on black violence that this whole issue about crime in the black community was but a setup, a rationalization for the genocidal attack against the black community. I warned you on black violence that if you really looked at the statistics, the greatest crooks and criminals in America are American white men. That this nation is a criminal nation. It is a supreme mafia. You heard me say that earlier. You heard me say that this nation has been at the center of wars that have destroyed within the 20th century some 167 million people. And yet they have convinced you that the threat to the world is the black male and the black drug dealer, as if the threat to the life of the world is in the hands of black men. You could have 10,000 black men on these streets every night, mugging 100 people apiece, and you would never begin to equal the number of people killed and destroyed by white males. But yet they're convincing you that a black male is the criminal. And what am I saying then? In order for us to be in the condition we're in, we have to literally return backwards. The victims of criminality have to be made to appear to be the criminals, and the criminals made to appear to be victims. When you talk about drug addiction, you're made to think that this is a major problem in the black community, and it is. But it's much more a major problem in the white community. Definitely. But why are we made to believe that we are the bulk of the drug addicts? Why are we made to believe that we generate the bulk of violent crime? In every criminal category, you will see that white males outrank black males. Just as in every welfare category, you will see white folk far exceeding black folk in numbers. In every area where people talk about entitlements, you will find that it is the white middle class and the white upper class that gets the largest bulk of government money. But yet when you hear the term entitlement programs, you automatically think of black folk. And yet when you hear the terms of welfare, you automatically think of black folk. And yet when you hear the term of violence and criminality, you automatically think what? Black folk. Yet whites are not unfamiliar with the actual figures. They have them. It means then, ladies and gentlemen, when a people ignore a set of facts, when they insist in the face of the facts, in believing in opposition to the facts, then the issue is not about truth. We have some people in our community who believe that if they keep telling white folk the truth, they're going to transform the American situation. We are going to talk truth to power. You're going to talk truth to power, all right, and get crushed for talking it. Why didn't the people tell the emperor he had no clothes? Because they recognized that telling him the truth placed them in danger. Only a naive child would talk truth and get away with it. So the issue is not about truth and telling white folk the truth of African history, the truth of our contributions to America, the truth of our great ancient past. For these people are not going to give up their privileges and wealth and power merely because they learned that you are Egyptians, or because you've contributed to American wealth, or these other things. It's too addictive for that. They will say, so what? Good for you. We are still holding on to what we got. And if you get in the way of what we got, we will crush you, Egyptian past or not. So the idea then that you're going to have a truth crusade that will rescue you from the subordination to white power is an illusion, and one you should rapidly get over. We're dealing here then, as I mentioned, with the uselessness of the African male and the fact that this system no longer has a place for the African male except for prison. And this, of course, is demonstrated by the fact that this white legislature is willing to pass a bill that spends $22 billion to build 10 additional federal prisons and to contribute to the building of prisons in states. It is willing to add 47 to 52 new laws that require the death penalty. It adds on to its many statutes a requirement that states treat 13-year-old black males and 13-year-olds as adults, and that they lay on them mandatory sentences so that they can spend lifetimes in prisons. They have lowered the treatment, the age of treatment, so that in a sense they can literally pick up young men out on the street in their, not hardly even into their teens, and lock them in the jails for the rest of their lives. So the issue here then is not an issue of whether black boys need to be trained into jobs and so forth. The issue is that the American economy is being transformed in such a way that there are few, if any, jobs for black men. It means, ladies and gentlemen, that the African American community must become a creator of jobs for its own people. Sidney Wilhelm said in the book, a seminal book which you cannot find, but an excellent book, Who Needs the Negro, written back in 1967, a classic book. The Negro becomes a victim of neglect as he becomes useless to an emerging economy of automation. With the onset of automation, the Negro moves out of his historical state of oppression into one of uselessness. We don't have time to talk about that phrase, you see. But America will become less overtly racist to the point where we become less useful to it. In other words, we're not going to block you from having freedom to do things, but the deal is you won't have money to do it. And so, you know, we're going to create fair everything, except the situation is you won't be in a position to take advantage of it. So the issue then won't be so much our oppression and overt racist oppression, but our absolute uselessness in an automated society, in a global economic system. In fact, the issue now has moved to a degree beyond racism, to a degree having to deal with the economic structuring of the world and of the society. He goes on to say, increasingly, he is not so much economically exploited as he is irrelevant. The tremendous historical change is taking place in these terms. He is not needed. He is not so much oppressed as unwanted, not so much unwanted as unnecessary, not so much abused as ignored. The dominant whites no longer need to exploit the black minority. As automation proceeds, it will be easier for the former to disregard the latter. In short, white America, by a more perfect application of mechanization and a vigorous reliance upon automation, disposes of the Negro. Consequently, the Negro transforms from an exploited labor force into an outcast. The Negro's anguish does not rise only out of brutalities of past oppression. The anxiety stems more than ever before out of being discarded as a waste product of technological production. And this is the world that we are facing. And therefore, being caught up in terms of racism is an obsolete fact. It is time now to deal with the economic and social realities of the world. We got Negroes here who were duped into a whole generation of stupid struggle. We have Jesse Jackson out here claiming to be speaking in terms of violence. We got an old leadership group of people here who are principally responsible for the violence that is occurring in the black community, pretending to be dealing with it. For it was their decisions made in the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s, and the 70s that created the kind of community that our youngsters must contend with today. Our youth did not make these neighborhoods. Our youth are not making the world that they live in, and yet we spend a great deal of time analyzing them and their music without analyzing ourselves as adults and looking at the decisions we made in the 60s and 70s that place our youth in the kind of situation they face today. And we cannot say that we were not warned. As a matter of fact, W.E.B. Du Bois warned the NAACP as far back as 1934 when he told them that blacks would be segregated for decade upon decade, and therefore the NAACP needs to promulgate an economic program for African people in terms of where they were in the American culture. And if the African American people were segregated in the American culture, then African American people needed to develop an economic system based on their segregated reality. He was thrown out of the NAACP for that reason. And he told them then in 1934 that African people would be segregated for decade upon decade. Why not establish an educational program that spoke to the needs of the people where they were? He was seen as a latter-day Booker T. Washington for saying so, and was thrown out. Booker T. Washington himself, at the turn of the century, was warning of the same thing. You need to get economic power. You need to gain control of your internal markets. You need to establish your economic stability. Deal with the votes later. This is what other immigrant groups do. No, the NAACP struggled, called him an Uncle Tom, derided this man, and now what do we have? We have the right to vote while we are homeless. We have the right to vote while we are jobless. We have the right to vote while our children are miseducated. This right that we were told would bring us a cornucopia of blessings and freedoms. We have the right to ride the front of the bus, and we're the only one riding on it. Yes. We have a right to sit at the lunch counter with white folk and we ain't got no money to buy a sandwich. We got all of these abstract rights, but nothing real. And this is the situation we face. We inhabit neighborhoods where the industries have flown away and left us bereft of jobs and opportunity. Why? Because we have not paid attention to the realities of our lives. And now we are overrun with violence, because violence is the result of social disorganization. Violence is the result of a nation not being able to feed and clothe its people legitimately. I think Ellis was the one, and his group indicated that when you looked at the number of black inmates in the prisons of New York, you would see that 75% of them came from essentially 7 neighborhoods in the whole state. And when you look at those neighborhoods of Brownsville and Harlem and South Jamaica, South Bronx, these areas, you will see that those are areas that have high indicators of other social problems. Joblessness, unemployment as we call it, low levels of education, high levels of infant mortality, a low percentage of native people in those areas that own and control the internal markets. In other words, there's a very direct relationship between the economic organization, between the educational organization and institutional organization of those communities, and the violence that is a part of those communities and characterize those communities. A very direct relationship. And yet when they were told in the 50s and the 60s that the economies of these communities should fall into the hands of African people and be developed by African people, they were told that we were engaged in self-segregation, that we would all live in suburbs with white folk. We'd all be a part of the Fortune 500. Our children would all be bused to learn that 2 + 2 is 4 in Scarsdale and White Plains, as if 2 + 2 is not 4 in Harlem. And yet we find ourselves overrun with violence here today. In other words, then, what we have recognized is that the major struggle in America is not the struggle for political democracy, but for economic democracy. For you can have political democracy. You can vote if you want to, but you can still be poverty-stricken. You can vote if you want to, but you will still have no power. As Robert Allen in his book, when he talks about, the Black Awakening in Capitalist America, he makes this statement that too many of us still believe that democracy works the way it is described in school textbooks. That is, that political power is based on the will of a majority of the people in a given geographical area. He goes on to say, but political power in America is dependent on those who control valued resources and critical institutions, not vice versa. And those who have this power cannot be voted out of their positions by the public at large, because the base of their power lies outside of the formal political sphere. Their base of power lies in the corporations and the large public institutions, which are interdependent but largely removed from the sway of public pressure. What did I just get through saying? The people that will run the global economic system and control the politics of America are not people who run for office. The heads of multinational corporate systems don't run for office. You don't vote on their election to their offices, yet it is those very people who determine the political and economic destiny of people. And yet you got a group of people, even on the radio station you revere so much, that tell you voting is your key to power. Voting is not a key to power. And we got a joker in South Africa who's running the same game on the South African people, who's going to run a game on African American people, claiming that they got a multi-ethnic, multicultural society, who are going to probably mix their diplomatic missions with blacks and coloreds and Afrikaner whites so that they can impress on the world that they have achieved diversity in the world. When the ownership of production and the ownership of land and wealth will remain as much in the hands of whites as it has ever remained. And you will think because you have elected a Nelson Mandela to be the president that you represent the taking over of South Africa by black people. If you believe that, you believe in the tooth fairy. You have never seen any multicultural, multi-ethnic nation rise to the top in the struggles of the world. You've only seen ethnic nations and nations based on ethnicity. But you want to fall asleep to some swan song. And Nelson Mandela should know better. He has the whole history of Africa before him, when other African jokers told their people that if they controlled the legislatures of their nations, and if they elected the heads of their government, that meant that they were free and in control of their nations. And yet today, as I told you earlier, Africa is frozen out of economic development with its African heads of nations and its African legislatures. Why? Because they did not see the first things first. And the first thing in a revolutionary change is that the revolutionary people take control of their lands and their wealth, or otherwise they have no real power. And power in America is not the power of the vote, but the power of the ownership of resources and the ownership of labor and control of labor. For when you own these things, you can buy the votes, and you can buy the elected officials voted into office by the people. You want a true example? If you read a few months ago, you would have seen your great Major Owens and your great Jenkins from New Jersey and some other black politicians of the Black Caucus being wined and dined in South Korea, having to meet the presidents of South Korea, meeting the president of the largest corporations over there, attending seminars on race harmony. What's going on here, ladies and gentlemen? These people whose trips were sponsored by a Korean pastor who pastors a black congregation in Nyack, New York, sponsored by the Koreans in America. What do you think is going on? You think because you voted for these people, they are going to see about your interests when another people is whining and dining them and toasting them and contributing to their campaigns and so forth? If you do, you're out of your mind. But this is the way politics is played, not by voting. You're deceived by a bourgeois class that is wedded to the Democratic Party, that has got the few crumbs that it has from being attached to the Democratic Party. That's why it cannot create an independent black party. You got the owners of your radio stations and other stations preaching to you about voting day in and day out. Why? because they gained their privileges, because they were voted into office by black people and used their being voted into office to parlay into the ownership of a bit of property. And therefore, they want black people in America to believe that electing them to office represents the path of freedom for the masses of the people. And consequently, then, they educate you about voting, but do not educate you about the reality of power in America. They make you think, then, that their power represents the power of the people. These lessons are too clear. But people who don't read, people who do not know the power of the word, will have all of this information right in front of them and perish. And we'll end it here soon. Yes, we're going to talk a little bit then about what's going on. In other words, the key struggle in America is the struggle for economic democracy. That means African people must come to own large and substantial portions of America. Not just moms and pop stores in Harlem, but we must, if these corporations are going to so-called rule the world, then we must be an intricate part and an integral part of these corporations. We either must be a part of their ownership or we must destroy them, one way or the other. When and how these corporations decide to move the world in terms of their interest, then African people must be a part of that decision-making process. And that means then the ownership of production in America, the ownership of production in Africa, the ownership of production in other parts of the world must belong to a good extent with African people. So we're talking about a broad and grand economic program here, because it is only through this kind of program that we can salvage our very lives as a people. To do this, though, ladies and gentlemen, you have to think of yourself as a nation. One of the reasons why we do not analyze our problems correctly is because we do not analyze them with the concept of nation. If you analyze problems in terms of individualism, you're in trouble. If you analyze problems in terms of family background, you're going to miss the whole point. If I hear this statement, we must return to traditional values, one more time I shall puke. What traditional values? This is not traditional America. Do you realize the transformation that has happened to America in the last 20 to 30 years? Do you recognize that values have to have some compatible relationship to the economic reality in which a people exist? And you're talking about recalling some primitive values in a whole nother world? What do white people mean by traditional values anyway? What are values? You think values are merely those things that determine what is right and what is wrong, what ought to be and what should be? Recognize, ladies and gentlemen, that values are instruments of social control. That's the chief basis for values. That is, what values you honor are those values that determine how you behave. Where your values are, there is your money. Where your values are, there is your attention. Where your values are, there is oriented your behavior. And therefore, values are determiners of how people will behave, how they think, how they see the world and relate one to the other. They're not just right and wrong. They're not just about personal salvation. They're not just about getting into heaven or staying out of hell. Values, you should ask, values for whom? Values for whose benefit? These are the questions. Who is teaching me these values that they say I should honor? And in what way do these values, if I practice them, will benefit them? And in what way would they work for me or against my interests? It's not just a matter of going to heaven or hell. There are black people who think then that they can separate moral behavior from economic behavior. When you choose to behave morally, you also make an economic choice. If you belong to a moral system that says you should wear all white all day and nothing else, the people who are into selling colored shirts are in trouble. That means that your very moral decision determines a market. But those people who sold the white uniforms are into it. In other words, then, when your moral system tells you to eat this and don't eat that, then those people who sell what you don't eat have problems. But those who sell you what you say you should eat are into the money. You don't make moral decisions separate from economic decisions. You don't choose values that are separate from everything else that goes on in the society. So when people start talking to you about choosing values, they are talking about a means of socially controlling your behavior. And when whites tell you about traditional family values and traditional American values, they're talking about those kind of values where you say, I'm poor and I'm in need, but I'm too proud to ask for welfare. Yeah. So that way you'll die filled with values. And the American public, which has robbed you in the first place, won't have to pay a nickel for you. Yeah, that's what traditional values are. Traditional values tell you that you can let another people starve you and cut off your lifeline, take total control of your economic system, but you're such a law-abiding citizen. You won't take control of your own wealth and you'll starve to death because you're a good Negro. The major reason why Africa, America is in the trouble it is today is because of good, law-abiding, church-going Negroes. Yes. Who do not realize that there's no such thing as a sacred law, but a game that's run on the people who make the law as a means of manipulating and robbing from other people. That's what it's about. So when you become law-abiding, you agree to the rules of the game. And if the rules of the game mean that those who are in control legitimize their thievery, you will go along with that theft of your very life and property because you want to claim how law-abiding you are. And someone has told you to render unto Caesar what is Caesar's when Caesar stole it from you in the first place. Someone told you not to see color and not to choose, and that to choose to take care of your own children and to spend money so that your own children can benefit first is reverse racism. So that you feel guilty when you spend with a black person and you feel inflated and morally pure when you give your money to other people. And you feel that you're doing God's will. And yet it goes against the very morality that you should know, that those who receive charity should be those who are in need of it most. And if you looked hard at your own situation, you would recognize that black children and black people are in need of your wealth more than any other people. But somebody's got you thinking that to give your wealth to people who are already rich, to not pay any attention to how you spend your money, is an example of Christian charity and morality. And therefore, following this moral structure, you have created neighborhoods overrun with the kind of problems that we talk about here today. Negroes who talk about that they're individuals and that they're doing their own thing. Isn't that interesting? We talk about individualism, right? That means that we're supposed to be uniquely different. If we're so uniquely different, why do we buy millions and millions of 3-liter bottles of Pepsi Cola? Why do we buy millions of pairs of Timberland shoes? Where are all these individuals who supposed to have such different tastes and choice? Why do we buy millions and millions of the same types of clothes, the same type of food, the same type of entertainment, the same type of music? What are we talking about? Who are these individuals who have such separate choices that they end up buying over and over again the same product, millions upon millions of the same product, saying they're doing their own thing, and I'm an individual expressing my own thing? You must be joking. You're no individuals. There's no such thing as individualism. It's a joke that the white man runs on you. You say these other people are individuals? Well, tell me this. Why is it that 180 million white individuals decide that they won't spend a nickel with you? If they are so free, and if they are so different, and if they are so unique, and if they do all their things, and if they, then why is it a good chunk of them don't spend money with black people? Where is this individual choice? Where is this individual choice when 7 or 8 million Asians will walk 10 miles around not to put a nickel in your hands, and yet they come and sell you everything they got? Where is this individualism, ladies and gentlemen? Where is this individualism in Detroit when Arabs can own the infrastructure of that city and Negroes spend money after money with them, and they not spend a dime, and they treat them like dogs? But we are individuals. We are doing our own thing. We are not a monolithic race. I believe in diversity. You're the only one that believes in it, too. Because, ladies and gentlemen, we are a de facto nation in America. Black people are the most segregated people on the American continent. We are even segregated in our suburbs. Only a small percentage of black people really live in what you call mixed neighborhoods. We are locked in these ghettos. And yet we are pretending that we're some kind of diverse culture. America literally has imprisoned us. And yet, unlike W.E.B. Du Bois or Booker T. Washington, we still hesitate to drop our buckets where we are and to operate as a nation. This country is not a whole country in the sense we think of it as. It is a nation of nations. You have the white American nation. You have the Arab American nation, the Korean American nation. Each of these ethnic groups essentially is a nation to itself. And they relate to each other the way nations relate to each other in the international sense. What do I mean by that? You hear the struggle that goes on between the United States and Japan, where the Japanese take advantage of the free market of America, so-called free market, sell in the American market, but build walls around their own country and block trade from the United States in Japan. Therefore, the Japanese earn tons of money from the United States, expatriates that money, and uses that money to advance its economic growth and to compete with the United States. This is what nations do. This is what nations are about. Clinton went to Seattle a few weeks ago to lick the Chinese ass. For what reason? Because the Chinese and the Southeast Asians are literally locking them out of their markets. And they're trying to find ways to break into the markets. We have a region here that within maybe 15 to 20 years will be the primary region in the world and have the largest market in the world, whose purchasing power will surpass that of Japan within the next 10 years, and whose economic dominance will be larger than that of the United States and Europe. And this is what the white boys are dealing with over there. And these people do not even need white money to advance their interests. Little Taiwan sits there with $215 million of investable money. Hong Kong sits there with $235 billion of investable money. You can go to Indonesia with 46 billion. You can look at Thailand with something like 30 billion. You're looking at a region with some 800 billions of dollars that it can invest in its economic growth and development. You can look at the Chinese economy, which today is the third largest economy, and is predicted by the Wall Street Journal will, by 2015, if this country does not derail it or steal from it, will be the largest economy in the world, growing at 12% today. This is what you're dealing with here. These are nations. And how do they do what they do? We're going to come back to that in a minute. But they operate as nations. That means that they try to take as much advantage of other people's market philosophies and the structure of other people's markets while doing what? Protecting their own. This is the way nations do it. When you then look at the Koreans or others in this country, you will see that they practice exactly the same political economy as does Japan. Which means what? That they take advantage of the free and open market of the African American nation, sell in that nation, create wealth in that nation's markets, export that wealth to their own, and block any access to their own markets by African Americans. And use then that exported wealth to continue to invest in the African American community, but ultimately to invest in the large American economy and to invest into the national and international economy and to fund the growth and development of their own native nations. This means then that African Americans have a political and economic ideology. You see, if we looked at ourselves as a nation, we would see that we have, as a nation, a political and economic strategy and an ideology. And we've had it over historical time. We believe in open markets, free markets, right? Yeah, we believe in that mythology because this is what we were taught in Economics 101. The greatest lies told in America are the lies around economics. Yes. We believe in being fair, so we're going to be an example to other people. What does that mean then? That we're going to open our markets and not prohibit them to enter our markets based on race or any other thing. See, that's reverse racism. We believe that people should be free to invest anywhere they feel like investing without regard to race, color, or creed. This is what they teach Negroes, despite the fact that this is not how the world operates in reality. This is the ideology of black folk. And this ideology then permits other nations and people to invade the African American markets and take advantage of those markets. But they don't have that belief in regard to their own. They believe that they should be in control of their markets. They believe that they should not leave it open for everyone else to come in. Therefore, what happens? They gain access to the African American market, and they retain access to their own market. And not only that, they block African American entrepreneurs from access to their own people. And now we're wondering why we're suffering the way we do. But it's because we as a nation have a self-defeating economic ideology. Because we believe Horatio Alger myths that people come in and they wash dishes for 20 years and save up their little money. And then they get a little store. And from that, they build a chain of stores. So this is kind of economic philosophy we've been taught. We've been taught that this is a free market where money talks and bullshit walks. Nonsense. America has never had a free market. It has never had an open market. Never. Black people have never been a part of an open market or a free market or a market system. A free market or an open market would be a market where trade and exchange takes place purely on the basis of value, where the buyer trades with the seller purely on the basis of price and worth of those things that are being traded. Nothing else is taken into consideration. In other words, in a free and pure market economy, you have an impersonality. Only money talks. But as soon as someone decides to sell or not sell because you are a different color, or raise the price because you're a different color, or deny loans because you're a different color, or deny access to the market and so forth, you're not in a market economy. You're not in a free market at all. And you've never been in one. And yet, you want to project your own market ideology as one of free and open markets, where you permit other people free access. You must understand that the white man rules and orders this society in terms of the economic system. It is by means of control of the economic system that he has that he creates class and racial differences, and that he disciplines the whole nation in terms of firing or not firing, in terms of wage and salary differentials, in terms of lending or not lending, in terms of information or not information, and by that means he orders and structures and determines the nature of the social system. And therefore, that kind of power that's given from which he gains his control cannot be freely given to any other people. It is not free for all comers. It means then that those who wield power in America and who will wield power in America must wrest control of this economic system from this person, the same way they wrest economic control from the Native Americans when they came here. Let me read you just a quick thing here, and our time is running. For these Negroes who believe in competition, capitalists are the most uncapitalistic people in the world. They do not believe in competition. They believe in destroying competition. They believe in creating what? Monopolies. They believe in gaining complete control. It's never been about free competition. It's been about power and control. Now let's look at what has been practiced here quickly in terms, and this comes from Theodore Cross's Black Power Imperative. I can't read them all here, but he lays out an interesting chart. He says for 300 years, the American colonies, the state and the federal government allotted untold billions of dollars of public wealth exclusively to members of the white race. And then they preached to Negroes that you're not supposed to ask for anything from the government. But ladies and gentlemen, the wealth that whites have today is the result of the government handing to them free land and free labor, by the way. Not competition, not people washing dishes and saving pennies and, buying this and that, but by people who use the government itself as a means of enriching themselves. In 1675, the Massachusetts Bay Colony seized plantation rights in 6 square-mile tracts to worthy individuals. The population of that colony included black slaves as well as free blacks. Neither were treated as worthy individuals eligible for land grants. The government was what? Giving away land. Maryland and Virginia in 1683 established 50-acre land grants to settlers who paid their own way across the Atlantic. Blacks were given a free ride in slave ships and thus were not eligible for grants. 1785, the federal ordinance of 1785 authorizes the sale of 640-acre tracts to settlers for $1 per acre. As slaves, blacks were legally prohibited from owning property. Where's your free market system, ladies and gentlemen? Where's your open market system that you have been taught to believe in? Why are you letting other people walk into your neighborhood? Because you believe in some antiquated and never real economic ideology. Because you're not taught the real history of America and not gained the real knowledge of America. Because you see, studying economic history and economics is a dull situation. You'd rather goose your neck in subway trains listening to music that hypnotizes you and drives you out of your mind. In 1850, the beginning of the massive federal land grant program for private railroad companies, Outright awards of 130 million acres frequently include property for 20 miles on either side of road beds. Those lands later found to contain billions of dollars of petroleum and mineral reserves. Black businessmen never considered qualified to acquire, finance, or operate railroad franchises. This old General Grant that you think was a part of your liberation was president during the giveaway of millions and millions and millions of American acres to a handful of white men in terms of building the rails, giving away to one railroad as much as 158 million acres. And the government financing the development of the railroads, the government buying the bonds of the railroad and the whole bit, and turning the wealth over to these white men. And they dared to talk to you about a free market and a free economy. Other railroads were given millions and millions of dollars. Learn the reality. To be truly Afrocentric, you must not only know your African history, but you must know American history, and you must know economic history the world over. It is not enough for you just to know about Africa, the history of Africa. You'll be deceived. You must know the reality of the situation. 1862, the Homestead Act grants settlers 160-acre tracts of federal land without charge. And they tell you the little few nickels you get from the federal government means that you're something decrepit. They're going to make your workforce so you can work for nothing in pennies and create a third workforce to underemploy and unemploy other people in the name of workfare. Over 250 acres of public land transferred almost exclusively to whites in the most important land grant program in American history. Negro claimants blocked by lynch mobs, intimidation, and refusal of local authorities to protect their claims. But as you said, Brother Harris, we're willing to protect these other people. They got a right to be here. 1889, in the celebrated Oklahoma land rush, 150,000 white settlers scrambled to claim the choicest land. Savage lynchings, Ku Klux Klan terrorism, and Jim Crow legislation kept Negroes out. Later, the heirs and successors of white settlers were to discover billions of dollars of petroleum reserves on these lands. So, you know, they're rich because they're smart, right? They're rich because they stayed up nights burning the midnight oil. They're rich because they were living their dream. Yeah, you believe that. We can go on. I mean, there's so much here. But what's going on here? They're telling you about individualism. In every one of these acts, you will see what? Collectives of people. Not individuals. Collectives. Rings. Syndicates. Cartels. Groups. Not individuals. Groups of men. You will see the whole legislature passing laws in their favor. Men. Women could even vote. Blacks could even vote. The legislatures of states and even the United States legislature itself was literally owned by the railroads, Jay Gould, Jim Fisk, you name them all, Rockefellers. That thief and dog literally owned almost every bit of oil in this country. Why? Because he broke the midnight oil? No, because he made all kinds of crooked deals. He priced his competitors right out of the market. He came in control of the refineries and manipulated prices. He used actual gangs and armies to destroy his competitors and to destroy people and to destroy labor. These men fought over the New York Central Railroad and the railroads going from here to Albany with fists and clubs and guns. Okay? And yet you think going to some college class where they're drawing price and equilibrium curves is going to get you some economic power in the world. And you think by keeping your nose clean and by being non-racial and non-ethnic, you're going to come and save yourself and get power in the world. You got another thought coming, and after a while you won't be able to think at all. Yes, You got to face the reality. You didn't make the world. It's a nasty, mean, dirty, low-down world. All right? And you're going to have to get in it and wrestle and get dirty with it. That's what it's about. Okay? But that's why they pump you with morality and churchism and spiritism. You see, so that you won't deal with the reality for what it is. In allocating places and opportunities according to race rather than merit, whites in the United States have used the full armory of coercive weapons commonly employed by the traditional combination of restraint of trade. No nation, what are you talking about, Japan, Germany, or any other nation, any other group of nations, has ever made it into the economic top echelon playing by the rules. None of them. None of them. They've always operated in terms of protecting their markets and getting a free ride on other people's markets. The Koreans are doing the same thing to you. The Arabs are doing the same thing. Whites have done the same thing and still doing the same thing. Every immigrant group comes in with the same strategy. Every immigrant nation do what? Protect our own and get a free ride on African Americans. That's what it's about. The United States defeated Britain and sent Britain into economic decline because the British, who were so arrogant about their manufacturing prowess, decided that they would throw their markets open and deal in free trade. And the United States for 150 years protected its own markets and protected its own industrialists with high tariffs and taxes, while it sold to Britain and while it sold to other nations in the world and grew to the point where it passed Britain in economic development. And Britain went into a decline for which it is yet to recover. And the Japanese are into the same game with the United States. And the Asians are into the same game with the United States. This is what the deal is about. If you see yourself as a nation, then you can see how the game is to be played. And then you learn the strategies by means of which it will be paid. But if you're just living your own individual dream, you'll never get it. And the dream is going to fall apart, just like Les Brown's dream fell apart. Yeah. He's going to learn that there's some other people dreaming beside you, buddy. And sometimes your dream clashes with theirs. Okay? Individual success is determined by the social structure in which they operate. Individuals cannot succeed by themselves. I do not care how much brain they have, determination they have, dreams they have. They must operate in an economic structure, a social structure that allows them to achieve their dreams. If that social and economic structure did not exist, they could dream all they want to. They will never get anywhere. In other words, then, individual success is social success. And individual success is created by a national or societal structure, not by individuals dreaming alone and pursuing their own self-interested dreams without regard to other individuals. But this is what we are told. We are told to do your own thing. Well, that's autoeroticism. Eroticism, isn't it? That's masturbation. Isn't that what that is? Yeah, do your own thing, you know. In other words, to do your own thing requires cooperation from some other folk. Yes. To even do your own thing as an individual requires what? Other people. Yes. You can't do your own thing by yourself. And so the most primal need of the human being for sexuality, for love, cannot be done totally by the individual themselves. They must enter into some kind of relationship with other people. One of the interesting things I find about individuals is they have an inherent tendency to form groups. You know, you think about it. We got it in here. We got so much here. But what we need here in the end, and what am I trying to say in the end? that your strength lies in your ethnicity. Your strength lies in your African consciousness. Consciousness is also an instrument of power. It's not just about knowing your African history or knowing yourself. Consciousness is the means by which an individual determines his or her behavior, you see? And the things used by consciousness, thinking, reasoning, information processing, and the values that are a part of that consciousness are the means by which the individual negotiates his way or her way in the world. You understand what I'm saying? It is through consciousness that you adapt to the world and adapt the world to yourself. And therefore, since consciousness guides behavior, since consciousness enables the individual to do various things, consciousness is an intelligence and consciousness is a power. The thing about consciousness, though, is that it can be socialized, meaning that consciousness that can be created by the nature of the interaction that the individual has with other people. And what has happened then is, in interacting with whites and Europeans, we have been inculcated with a Eurocentrically generated consciousness. And once that consciousness has been imposed upon us, and since it is an instrument of power, it means then that the Europeans have power over us through the consciousness that they created in us. You can then only escape from European power by developing an African-centered consciousness based on African-centered values, you see? Because if consciousness guides behavior, if values guide behavior, then if those values are your own, and if that consciousness is your own, then people with another consciousness and another set of values cannot control how you behave. Understand? That is why African-centered consciousness frightens them to death, because they recognize that their whole social order is built upon the consciousness that they have inculcated into African people, and is built upon the values which direct that consciousness. And that means then, if African people begin to follow the lead of African values and follow the lead of an African consciousness, the social order that is built upon their having an Eurocentric consciousness will collapse and fall apart. You must understand what this means. We got to do it here. I got to let you go. Maybe we'll finish this on another day. Thank you for your attention.
Hold it, we don't want you to go anywhere right now. Here you go, Mr. Bank, please. Professor Amos Wilson came out here in all this cold and everything to give it his message, and he has a great project going on to see that this information is disseminated among African peoples everywhere, as is the African Nationalist Construction Movement. But we don't want him to leave here with no kind of money.
We can get out of our economic poverty if we can look further than our nose, okay? The door is open for us to come to Africa and make money. Why don't we check it out? That's the answer right there. That's theory and then application to the theory, okay? All right, so the ANCM has that program going. It's real. And that's no jive, okay? Check it out. I went to Namibia, and when I went to Namibia on the fact-finding trip with our organization, we went to visit the different ministries, and all these crackers were lined up knee-deep all along the hall waiting to go in with money to take all the gold and diamonds and everything out of Namibia. We were the only Africans there. What about that? It's something to think about.
Thank you, Sister Black Rose. We can't help but be human to show the disgust and the negatives of our behavior, but it's not you people here. You came out, you're doing your part, and the disgust is shown for those who don't do their part. Naturally, I'm excited just like Sister Black Rose, and we have a wonderful opportunity open to us all over Africa, but particularly we have made definitely inroads for you and ourselves in Namibia. Okay, thank you for coming out, and those of you who haven't came and made your contribution, you still have a chance. We haven't left the building yet.